Hello, everybody. My name's Jim, and this is a relationship web for Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. I didn't know how else to review this book, so I'm doing a relationship web for it. This one, I don't want to say that I have no faith in the challenge that I imposed upon myself, but this first book just did do it for me. This ended up being a 1-star read, and I felt like I needed to rant. So this is how I'm going to do it. If you don't want any spoilers, there is a review for this book, a spoiler-free review, on a channel called Michaela Reads. I'm going to link you over to that one where she not only reviews this book, but also reviews other mystery thriller books that she read, I believe, in 7 days, 7 books in 7 days. I think that's what her video was. So go over there. She basically shares the same opinions I do. I'm just going to elaborate on those a little bit more. So, like, if you just want to stick around, listen to spoilers, and listen to me rant, then that's cool too. But without further ado, we're going to get into Louise, who is our hero, our protagonist, our main character, who started this whole thing off with a drunken kiss with some random schmo named David in a bar. She finds out that David is her boss. She's a secretary at a clinic. He is her new boss, and she sees that he is very married with a woman named Adele. They take a tour of the building, and she hides in the bathroom with her friend Sophie, who I'm going to talk about later, but Sophie's like the best character in this whole thing. And instead of squashing it there, no, she continues to be obsessed over this man that she met for all of 2 hours at a bar after drinking. There was no need for this to be set off by a love triangle at all. I didn't think that this element was necessary, and at the end of this, I'm going to kind of talk about what I would do to change this without completely ruining the story that I believe Sarah Pinborough wanted to tell with this. But it just felt rushed. It felt a little bit it felt a little odd that Louise would feel so obsessed over this David guy when she really didn't know him. It just becomes this spiraling obsession about him. Not only should she have cut it off because he's married, but she should have cut it off when she found out that she was working for him. Yes, he is a creep for cheating on his wife and having an affair with another woman, but he keeps telling her, we need to stop this. You need to go away. You need to, kind of stay away from my wife and me. But she doesn't do it. She keeps persisting and going back, and they end up having sex multiple times, and it's just this really awkward situation that honestly should not have been written in. It shouldn't have been a love triangle, because there is no reason why Louise should be this invested in this married couple. She shouldn't be risking everything for a man, again, that she knew for 2 hours before realizing that they were going to work together. As I said, she became best friends with this woman named Adele, who is David's wife, which is a huge mistake. But the real plot of this story is that there's something about Adele. There's something odd. There's something different going on. She has suffered some trauma because of the death of her parents. They burned in a house fire, and David was able to rescue Adele from the burning building. You learn over time that she appreciates this, but Adele being a point of view character in general doesn't make sense, because I feel like in the beginning if we're listening to her internalizations, like, of course she could present as this person who is being manipulated, but her internalizations should not be that way. We should know that there is something wrong with Adele from the jump. And the thing is that we do catch up with Adele. We do figure out that there's something not quite right with her, and since Louise is the other point of view character, she's just trying to play catch up the whole time, and so that makes the story drag. But when Adele befriends Louise, she begins to teach her about lucid dreaming. She learned lucid dreaming either before or during her stay at the hospital where she was recovering, and she was possibly dealing with survivor's guilt at that point, and she was having a lot of trouble sleeping. She meets Rob at the hospital, who ends up being her best friend there, and Also teaches him about lucid dreaming. And if you don't know what lucid dreaming is, it's kind of like this awareness that you are dreaming. You're not fully asleep. You're not fully awake. It's kind of an in between where you know that you're dreaming and you can kind of control that dream. So she teaches Rob this as well. She didn't go into the lucid dreaming as much as I would have liked her to. I thought that this was a cool element, but instead she focused most of her attention on the love triangle that just did not work. And I'm going to repeat that until I'm blue in the face. It didn't work, Sarah. It didn't work. But anyway, through these flashbacks between her being in the hospital and through her point of view, you do get a little better sense of the personality shift, the change in her demeanor, because back when she was in the hospital, you know, she was even afraid to smile. She was meek and she was not so social. She was a little bit afraid to make friends, which is why Rob was so special and how she clung on to him while she was there so that she could actually have a friend, a best friend that she could confide in with everything. And eventually, you know, she, despite being, you know, a little bit worried that David maybe wouldn't like Rob, she convinced herself eventually that of course David would like Rob, because who wouldn't like Rob? He actually was a pretty cool character back when he was in the hospital and they were talking. I really liked his character. You know, they did drugs together. They had a few laughs. They talked about their stories. And eventually Rob and David were able to meet with Adele's help. And I'm going to get into their meeting a little bit more later, but in order to get to know David a little bit better, you know, Rob told Adele, like you go sleep, let the two men talk so that we could have a closer relationship, and you know, you can be my friend and also have your husband and not have any of this weirdness going on, where, you know, one of the men is jealous of the other one. So she obliged and that relationship started to form. But again, gonna get into that a little bit later when I actually talk about Rob. But I'm gonna move on to David, who is this guy that everybody falls over themselves for, yet I am sitting here completely dry. I don't understand. It is the biggest mystery of them all. Even when Adele starts to act more like the manipulator, more like the abuser, the one who is hanging blackmail over David's head, David still doesn't look good. Innocence does not make somebody attractive. Innocence can only go so far. And the way that he spoke to Louise and Adele throughout the book, it felt like it only served the plot. A lot of this only served the plot, it seemed, because some of the things that were done and some of the things that were said were there to keep everything mysterious. But there was this whole thing that he was afraid to bring up certain details about his history with Adele. But Louise was just going to pry and pry and pry. And eventually, Louise ended up losing her job. David ended up firing her. He went after Louise saying, you know, I thought I could trust you. I can't believe you lied to me, blah, blah, blah. All of this stuff he was saying while he was literally cheating on his wife. He was speaking to the woman that he was having an affair with, telling her that she was unfaithful and she was a liar, which was completely hypocritical and completely ruined his character for me. Like, after that, there was no turning back. None of that made him very respectable. It didn't make me feel better about him when I ultimately figured out that he wasn't as bad as he was being made out to be, all because this stuff was set up conveniently for the plot, and it just it didn't make me like him. I didn't like him. I wasn't happy about the ending either. But yeah, so there's this whole mystery around Rob, and I'll go ahead and tell you now that Rob died after he and David met. So as Adele is becoming more of a manipulator, we get into this scene where Rob dies, and in a panic, Adele drags his body out and throws him into a well, and in doing so, the large watch this is David's watch that she wears around her wrist so that she can remain close to him, falls into the well with Rob. In order to not get in trouble, David decides to keep Adele's secret because with his watch in the well, as I said, that would be incriminating evidence against David. But Louise found this out, and in her stupidity, she sent a letter to the chief of police to incriminate David even further for the murder of Rob, even though she didn't know everything. Like, she is the sloppiest person. Like, she doesn't need to go this far. And again, gonna say it again, all because of a kiss and a 2-hour meeting in a bar. Like, she is not only ruining these people's lives further, but she's ruining her own life. She's getting involved in something that she really doesn't need to be involved in. And what's even worse is that David's not even mad at her at this point. David was more angry that she became Adele's friend than her going to the police, because he says that if he goes to prison, then that means he's finally free and he doesn't have to be around Adele anymore. He just wants everything to be finished. And if he is out of the way, then that, of course, conflicts with Adele and her manipulation, because she's not going to have anybody to control anymore. And so, he kind of screws her up in that instance as well. So he's not angry with Louise for sending a letter to the chief of police to say, this guy is guilty. He did it, take him to jail. And of course, Louise feels remorseful about it, but again, she shouldn't have been involved in this in the first place. It just makes no sense. So now we're going to talk about somebody who does make a lot of sense, and that's Sophie. We're going to rewind a little bit, because Sophie needs a little bit more attention than she actually got in the novel itself. She's the only person in the whole book who made any logical sense whatsoever, but she was completely sidelined by Louise as lead bestie when Adele came along, even though Sophie, in her short time in this novel, gave Louise such good advice about just steering clear, not doing certain things, and she kept saying it. And Sophie, the definition of insanity. Like, I understand that you're trying to help your friend, but she is not listening. You told her to stop pursuing David. No. You told her to stop speaking with Adele. No. And you told her not to go further and reach out to Marianne. No, she was going to do everything that you told her not to do. And speaking of Adele, this is something about Louise that irked me as well, because there were so many internalizations where Louise was wondering whether she was doing the right thing or not. Like, her conscience was even telling her that she was not doing the right thing. And there was a time where she even mentioned Sophie and Sophie's warning and saying, gosh, maybe I should have listened to Sophie. You think Sophie, no, don't even talk to her if you're not going to listen to her. What good is a friend if you're not even going to listen to? Oh, right, she's not your best friend. Even though you know her, even though both Sophie's little girl and Louise's little boy Adam have little kid crushes on each other, no, she's not your best friend. Like, it makes no sense that she would be pushed aside for Adele, who, again, met for like an hour for lunch, and suddenly Adele was her bestie and Sophie was just this acquaintance, this person that worked with her, a colleague. I don't understand Louise's relationships. They just don't make sense in this book. But that's really all that I have to say about Sophie. There was a brief thing with her at the end, but I'm going to talk about that again when I talk about Rob. But we love Sophie. Sophie deserved better than Louise. Now, here's Marianne. So I don't really remember what her full relationship was with David, but it wasn't an affair like Louise, because Louise made a big deal to say, thank goodness that Marianne and David's relationship wasn't the same as Louise and David. But she kind of acted as a confidant for David's, and I believe at the same time Adele was jealous of Marianne. But that's another thing that doesn't make sense, because and it might have been mentioned in the book, but I think there were so many parts where I just kind of glossed over it and zoned out a little bit. But I don't know if it was explained why exactly Adele didn't treat Marianne the same way that she treated Louise, because Adele immediately latched onto Louise. And again, that has a lot to do with the plot convenience. Like, why are these characters treating each other like their lifelines when people they've known for years, like Sophie and, a confidant like Marianne, aren't as valuable? It doesn't really make sense. Oh, and also I do need to mention this. I actually put it in my notes to say this, but every single person in this book was hot except for Marianne, who Louise said was not quite beautiful. She was just attractive, because I guess we love diversity. Like, everybody was pretty, everybody was rich. It was like upper middle class, ooh, so bougie. And then here's Marianne, who's just attractive. Like, she's just kind of there. She's not quite all the way. It's just like every single chapter we had somebody who was beautiful, somebody who was handsome, and then you get to Marianne, who's attractive, and you're like, oh, finally somebody different. You know what I mean? Oh my gosh. So yeah, I don't know why Marianne was treated so poorly when Louise was so quickly accepted by Adele, but again, this book's relationships really don't make sense. When Louise went to talk to Marianne about this whole situation with David, like it was kind of like an interrogation. She went to her house and she talked to her, I think. Marianne was telling her about her cat named Charlie. Adele came by one day and she was upset about something. It was jealousy, I guess. Like I said, I was kind of zoning out at this part. And just a heads up, animal abuse coming up. Skip to the next section. I'm going to give you a warning now. I was about to continue, but if this hits people the way it hits me, then I don't really want to trigger anybody. So jump ahead. For everybody else, I'm not going to really detail exactly what happened to Charlie the cat, but just know that Adele came by and murdered Charlie in a gruesome way right in front of Adele's face, right at her doorstep. I feel in a way that they took it a little bit too far, because we kind of already knew that Adele was not quite right. And then going back to, the past with her in the hospital, and then the present day Adele, you can tell that there was a personality shift, and this is something that past Adele absolutely would not do. But after this, Marianne kind of acted as a witness to Adele's behavior, and when she called David over to talk about it, of course she was completely upset, but she told Louise that he didn't seem surprised at all by what Adele had done. Like, he was disgusted, he was horrified, but he wasn't surprised, and he was actually relieved that Adele had only hurt the cat and didn't actually hurt Marianne, which Marianne said scared her even more, that he was so relieved that she only hurt the cat, because evidently she was capable of doing a lot more than just what she did with the cat. But that was awful. Hated that. I hate violence against animals. That was horrific. That was horrible. Marianne obviously never went to the police, because otherwise something would have been done about Adele, and it just didn't happen. But at least with Marianne, at this point, there is another witness to Adele's abuse, because this whole time Adele's been, dangling Rob's murder over David's head. And at least with Marianne, if they were to go to the cops now, if they were to find out, which Louise sent the letter, so of course they're going to find out, then at least Marianne would be there to hopefully provide some backup to David, because he's not a killer. I can't really say with full confidence that he's not a bad guy, because he really hasn't conveyed anything other than, being hot and rich. But, these people are just obsessed with him. But yeah, so at the end of it all, the question comes down to, why is Adele so unhinged? And that's where Rob comes into play. So I mentioned before how Adele taught Rob how to lucid dream, and over time I believe he is the one who wanted to try astral projection, which is kind of like an out of body experience. It's where your astral body leaves your physical body and is able to kind of roam around the astral plane. It's kind of interesting to look up. I don't know really how to explain it so much, but what they learned is that they were able to basically switch souls with each other. So Rob's soul could enter Adele's physical body, and then Adele's soul could enter Rob's physical body. And this is something that Adele taught Louise as well, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But because Rob, like everybody else, was so enamored with David after literally just a weekend, he ended up doing this astral projection with Adele, and he killed his physical body with a lethal injection, I believe, of heroin, and dumped his physical body with Adele's soul in it into the well. So Adele is gone. Her soul is gone, and that is why she had a sudden shift in her personality and her mannerisms, and why she really isn't the same woman as she was before, because her soul is Rob now. And again, as I mentioned before, the reason why Adele, who is Rob, as we know now, so I'm just gonna say Rob. I'm gonna be talking about Adele, like, just pay attention to the context, because this is just gonna get a little bit confusing, and I'm so sorry. Anyway, so Rob Adele, I'll just say that. Rob Adele is the one who is dangling the murder over David's head because of the watch, as I mentioned before. And going back to the letter to the police that Louise sent, the police ended up talking to David, and I believe they gathered enough information to where David ended up being innocent and released, and everything was good. But they needed to, at that point, go and fetch Adele. But again, against her better judgment, Louise, I think this was immediately after talking to Sophie, and Sophie said, you need to do what David said and stay away from Adele because David's fine now. Louise said something to the effect of, like, she promised Sophie that she wouldn't meet Adele in person, like she wouldn't go to her house, but she never said that she wouldn't speak to Adele. So what ends up happening at the end is that Louise and Adele do this astral projection thing again. This is something that Louise had done earlier in the book. She projected herself into Adam's room, her son's, and when she woke up for real, she went into his bedroom and saw that his bedroom looked exactly like it did in the dream, with Paddington on the floor and everything. She thought that she was sleepwalking. She couldn't see her arms and her legs, like she couldn't see her limbs, so she couldn't really like interact with the environment. And there's a whole thing with doors. There's door number 1, door number 2. Door number 2 is the astral projection. It's a lot. Okay, it's a lot to take in, and Sarah Pinborough didn't spend a lot of time stretching this information out, so it was just kind of like, take it as it comes. So anyway, that's that summary. So Louise's meddling butt got herself astral projected out of her physical body and into Adele's, and there is a time, because we are in Louise's point of view at that point, where she says, I'm no longer staring out of my eyes, I'm staring out of hers, which is, hello, behind her eyes. That's the whole point of the title. And what happens at this point is that Adele, the physical body with Louise's soul inside it, ends up dying the same way that Rob did. So when the police come to take Adele away, she is being carried out by Louise's physical body, who is now inhabited by Rob. And Rob Louise tells the cops that she made it halfway down the stairs and she passed away. So her body's taken away. I guess they assume that she did it to herself after the whole thing where David was found innocent and they needed to find her and take her. So yeah, so now Rob is in Louise, and poor David, who thinks he's out of the woods, is no longer out of the woods. He and Louise end up getting together, reconnecting, squashing everything. I guess he's still not charming, but I guess they're working things out behind the scenes. We don't really get to see it, but in the car, I believe at this point they're married. I think they're married because she uses his last name, and I can't remember his last name. But in the car, they're talking and they're, exchanging I love yous, whatever. I might be wrong, but he asks her about a honeymoon, I think, and she tells him wherever he wants to go. And maybe he mentions boats, or maybe she mentions boats, and he says something along the lines of, Adam, her son, always tells me that you don't like boats. And it's this thing, it's what David says here that makes Rob Louise realize, oh crap, Adam knows everything about me, and so does my ex-husband Ian. I don't even know everything about Louise because I've only known her as a friend. Like, it's very limited what Louise and Rob Adele were able to exchange back and forth. So the book ends with Rob Louise beginning to plot a way to eliminate Adam and Ian. So that sucks. But yeah, so that's the book, and that's the big twist. I saw a lot of reviews that said that the final twist was kind of out of the blue. I don't really agree with that. I will say, though, that the majority of the book is about the love triangle and the cheating, which is probably where people got this from. But I did kind of see the progression over the last few chapters, I guess. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's what made it feel like it was so out of the blue, is just that it happened within the last few chapters. But it didn't seem super sudden. It didn't seem super sudden to me, but that's just me. I still didn't like the book. So that wasn't a thing. But I will say, though, that one thing that bugs me is that Rob, of course, is the queer representation in this book, and of course the only reason why he wanted David was to have sex with him, which is not a good trope for our bi friends. That is very harmful. That is a predatory trope, and we do not accept that. We don't like that. But yeah, so some of the things that I would have changed about this is I would have made this from David's perspective, and possibly Louise as another point of view. We didn't need Adele's perspective because I feel like her perspective was written so conveniently in the story, to where we should have known her internalizations from the get-go. We never should have assumed that she was the victim in all of this and that she was the primary manipulator. But instead, we went through over half the book thinking that David was this bad guy. And, I mean, again, he didn't really do anything to prove that he wasn't. And I think that this book went through so many hoops and hurdles to try to make him seem okay after it all. Like, you're supposed to feel sympathy for him, but I never did, because I think that we spent too much time with this love triangle thinking that he was this dirty, rotten cheater, which, I mean, he was. He still cheated on his wife, that it kind of ruined his character afterwards, and we really didn't care what happened to him. I would have put this in his perspective. He would have had more of a reason to get to the bottom of why Adele was behaving the way that she was. There would have been this really cool plot where Adele, goes to the hospital, deals with her trauma there, comes back to David, and there's something off about her, something not quite right. Or even, have the whole scene with Adele and Rob meeting David, and, after that meeting, having Adele's personality change. I think that would have been a lot more interesting, and David certainly would have been the more reasonable option to dig through files, possibly about her being at the hospital and things like that, because she was because Adele at the hospital was told by Rob to kind of make things up and go along and tell them exactly what they want to hear so that they think that they are actually making a difference with her. So yeah, David would have much more of a reason to meddle because that's literally his wife. And then Louise could still be his secretary, and he could still drag Louise into it just as a confidant. David could still be new to town. He could still be her new boss. She could see him day after day, slowly spiraling, maybe showing signs of depression and feeling down, and eventually, build up the courage to ask him about it, because he ended up moving to that town after the whole thing with Marianne where Adele snapped and did what she did. I'm not going to repeat it again for people who clicked away, but you could still have that relationship. And if you ever wanted to throw in a love triangle, then have David and Louise working on figuring this stuff out together so much, and being at each other's houses and digging through the doctor's files and things like that, and having some sort of affair with each other. All of that could have made more sense if Louise was a little bit more of a side character and somebody who existed already. It would have been a lot more organic, I think, going from front to back than starting this all off with the love triangle that didn't really make sense because Louise immediately was so obsessed with David, and then ultimately so obsessed with Adele after meeting them for only a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, her relationship with Sophie, for example, who she's known for a lot longer, was just kind of sidelined, pushed to the side. It made it seem like she didn't care about somebody who honestly would have been more logical to bring in as her best friend. So that's really all I would have done to change this. I would have also liked to have had more of a focus on the lucid dreaming and the astral projection, because that would have been such a cool thing for them to somehow meet while simultaneously astral projecting, have them meet in the astral plane and have David and or Louise figure out that that's where Rob was. And you could even have Louise do that. You could have her and Rob exchange bodies again, and when Adele passes away like she did in the story, you could have David feel that relief but not know that Rob now inhabits Louise's body. It's the same story. It just doesn't start with that stupid love triangle that didn't make sense. You should not be that obsessed about somebody after drinking and having a drunken kiss, especially if you see them married, especially if they turn out to be your boss. Like, yes, David was a slime ball through over half of the book, but gosh darn it, Louise, get out of it. Get out of that. There's nothing that isn't love. And I'm sorry, but there is nothing that ruins attraction more to me than a cheater, and knowing that someone is a cheater. Like, I just don't see the logic in that. I don't think that was a really good foundation to build this story off of. It just seemed very convenient. It seemed very forced, and just by eliminating Adele as a point of view character and just having her off to the side, and possibly having her point of view be those past chapters where she was in the hospital, because that would be cool to kind of have the reader follow along and pick out clues as well as we go through Adele's past with Rob in the hospital. Doing that and subsequently making the dialogue and narration far less forced, and having David be the main protagonist who is trying to figure out what happened to his wife, I think that would work best. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't, maybe you love this book the way it was. I didn't like it, and the fact that this became a Netflix series, like Sarah Pinborough, she's getting her money. Like, it really doesn't matter what I say. She is being paid a lot for this book, so I don't feel bad about tearing it apart. I don't typically do this for books. I typically do have a lot of nice things to say. I typically read very good, or at least decent books that I do have some positive to say, but this one was a slog. There was too much attention paid to the love triangle, and it just drove me crazy. But if you're not convinced by this character review and this relationship web and you want to read this book for yourself, as always, there's a link to the Goodreads page in the description below. Click on that. Go to the retailer of your choice on the Goodreads page and purchase it for yourself, or if it's in the library, you can obviously always check it out. Be sure to leave a like on this video. Otherwise, I've been Jim. You've been great. Happy reading.